The following video is available in audio-only format on the free Red Pill Philosophy smartphone app. If you're about to hit the gym or go for a walk or on your way to work, just pop in your headphones and take this video on the go with you. To download the free app, just click the link below. Hey, what's up everybody? Thanks a lot for tuning in to Red Pill Philosophy. Today I'm joined by a fellow YouTuber, big anti-feminist type dude. His name is No Holds Barred. I guess that means he's no holds barred in his obliteration of feminist illusions. Definitely his link to his channel is below. Check it out. I think you guys will enjoy a lot of his videos. Some of his videos are pretty damn good. Today we're going to talk about my book, which recently came out, called Success Without School, Think Outside the Classroom. Mason here, he purchased it, he took a listen to it, he read the book.
It was a really good listen for me because I guess it's very thought-provoking and it really got me to kind of analyze topics that I've thought about my whole life and have had very little understanding or sympathy about when talking about these things. Essentially, like, whilst reading or listening to the book, just made me think about a lot of different concepts. And a memory that came to mind was when I was just sitting in class in, like, free playtime and assembling different boxes, like Glad wrap boxes with masking tape and straws. And I made like this little, I don't know what it was. Maybe I thought it was a car or something, but it had a metal strip from a Glad wrap dispenser, Glad wrap roll, masking taped onto it. And for that reason, the teacher got my work, tore it to shreds, and threw that thing in the bin because it was dangerous. And I just remember like that standing out, it's just like it's so small and insignificant, like in its like looking back at it. But I remember like at that point in time, it just felt like she was just like destroying like something much greater than a pile of trash that I had assembled. Like she was destroying my free will to experiment and to create, all for an illusion of safety. But yeah, it made me really reminisce on school, kindy. You're really just forced into this system against your will, and you have zero say in the matter.
Yeah, bro. I mean, yeah, the school system, I think everybody has a horror story like that one. One of my horror stories that I love to tell, I mean, it really just proves the stupidity of the average mainstream school. And I love this story. I mean, hey, I didn't want this story to happen back when I was in 11th grade high school. This is an experience that just happened to me. And it just happened to prove all my bubbling intuitions about the school system, which back then, about 10 years ago, I couldn't grasp the little whisper in my intuition that was saying school's a fucking scam. I couldn't articulate it. I just knew at a gut level that there's something wrong with this system. So basically, I've always liked writing. That was one thing I like to do, especially creative writing. You tell me your assignment today, Chris, is do a freaking story, and I will write 500 pages without a fucking issue. So the project, the assignment that the English teacher assigned was to write a short story. That was it. There wasn't any specifications, just write a short story. So I went home over the weekend and I wrote a short story. Okay, it was about 20 pages long, but I think some short stories could actually go to about 20 pages. I mean, if you go to the bookstore and you buy a novel and it's 20 pages, you're going to say, well, that's a small fucking novel. That's probably just a short story. You think of a novel at least 100 pages. So I thought 20 pages was still a short story. Well, come Monday, I turned in the assignment. I handed it to the teacher, proud, knowing I'm going to get an A++ on that shit, because I write well, I love to write, and it's 20 pages. There's no way she's going to give me a bad grade. Well, maybe a week later, I don't remember how long it was later, I get the paper back, and there's a D scrawled across the thing. And I'm like, how is this possible? So I go up to the teacher and I ask her, why do I have a D? And she says, this is too long. This is too long. This isn't a short story. This is a short novel. So, I being a much more timid person back then, I went back to my seat with my tail between my legs and I didn't fight it. I accepted the fucking D. But, if the purpose of English class is to teach you how to write, and I wrote 20 pages. She didn't say the writing was bad, she just said it was too long. If I wrote 20 fucking pages, doesn't that just prove that I'm a great fucking writer? And isn't that the purpose of the English class? To ensure that I'm a great writer? But notice that she graded me not on my capacity to write, she graded me on my capacity to follow orders. Did you actually do what I told you to do, little fucking faggot bitch? Did you write a short story? No, I didn't write a short story. I wrote a short novel in her words. And what was the outcome? She gave me a fucking D. So yes, your story, my story, I think we all have these little horror stories from the school system that kind of make you question whether or not school is actually about what they claim it's about. They claim it's about making you as smart as possible so you can go out there and get a job and make money and be happy. Yet, it doesn't seem that that's always the case, and these little anecdotes, these little personal experiences, really bring into question whether or not that's true. And, I could ramble on forever, but, it's sickening. It really is sickening. I don't know if you have something you want to throw in there.
Oh yeah, like I have so many horror stories to throw in that like I could talk about this for days. Like there are just so many incidents at school, university, preschool that it would it would make a book in itself. Like you've made a book based upon it's more based upon the argument that there are a lot of examples of geniuses that didn't excel in school, and you're using like more factual based evidence approach, but to have a book that's based upon anecdotal, experiences that could also fill up an entire book. And to put it into perspective, one of my more recent experiences, I just told you the kindergarten story, may as well tell you the most recent story, is with university, where I essentially just finished doing what was supposed to be a 5-year course, but I ended up having to do it over 6 years because after never failing a subject in my life besides once in school, and it didn't matter because um, I think, yeah, I just didn't need to, it wasn't like a core subject. I didn't need to pass it to get to the next year level. I had essentially never really failed a subject in my life until the final year of university, when I decided, hey, I want to do the best work I can possibly do this year for my final assignment. I want to do something that's creative and innovative and something that I'm really passionate about and enjoy, so that I'll have the motivation to put in 100%. So I essentially had to do a couple of theoretical research-based subjects in which I chose to research the phenomenon of industrial collapse, of potential agricultural collapse, which is quite possible within the next few decades. And my practical subject, which is where you actually design a building, was to design an automated vertical farm that addresses the issue of agricultural collapse by creating buildings that produce food and then sell the food to be consumed or exported in the same location, so that every calorie of food has less calories or uh, units of energy of oil consumed. Because like when you get food from farms, it has to be grown using fertilizer, using tractors, and transported to supermarkets, stored in refrigerators, in packaging, and all of these processes use a lot of oil, which is what makes them unsustainable systems. So
Mm.
if you reduce the amount of energy expended per calorie of food, you can drastically increase the technical efficiency of our food production system. So I designed a building that was designed to accommodate existing, I want to make that very clear, existing technology based around this idea of vertical farming. So I used technologies from Vertical Farms Australia. I sent them a personal email asking them the minimum ceiling height requirements for these installations and how, um, if they need, they also recommended they needed extremely load-bearing floors as well, which I took into consideration. They recommended that they are not exposed to sunlight and instead are installed in highly insulated areas. And a few of the key reasons that the architecture teachers failed me on this assignment is because my ceilings were too high and the plants weren't exposed to sunlight. So even though I had an email in writing that I showed them after and I disputed that they should have failed me and I showed them, they still stood by their claim that my ceilings were too high, even though they were just the bare minimum for these installations to fit in. And that if these systems were in fact exposed to sunlight, then they wouldn't work based on the people that made these systems. And then I had other subjective opinions thrown at me by this one university lecturer who literally promotes the idea that children under the age of, like 13 should be involved in the decision-making process of architecture and cities, which, I don't think is, that outrageous, but to suggest that just because they're children, they should be doing this, I do think is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But her opinion is basically one of the reasons she failed me is because the beauty of food was not expressed in the architecture. And I was just essentially getting bombarded with all this bullshit that was really, to me, just like subjective garbage and not really based around any kind of critical thinking or problem solving or innovation, which I thought was supposed to be the point of education, especially university. And
Do you
it really
think
just like.
do you think that the reason they gave you such a poor grade or failed you on that assignment was because what you were proposing was just too outside the norm of architecture?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Just one of the reasons that one of the criticisms I got as well was if you need to explain the premise of your idea for over 5 minutes during your presentation, then you haven't thought of, then it's not a simple enough idea to present pretty much. Because we like keep this in mind as well. We get for our final assignment, which we spend an entire year on, we get something like 10 minutes to present our idea and our foundational framework for like
Ugh,
why
yeah.
is this idea a good idea.
Ugh.
We get 10 minutes. So it's like this is my idea, like, a short architectural idea, a short story, and like, if you're taking, half of your time explaining why this is necessary, perhaps it's too complicated. No, perhaps that's bullshit.
This is what I call intellectual authoritarianism. I think there's a part of my book where I kind of breeze over this idea, but it's just the idea that, I mean, if you think about it, the fact that they only give you 10 minutes to propose a revolutionary new architectural model for changing the paradigm of how we produce food and stuff like that. If they only give you 10 minutes to do that, the reason they only give you 10 minutes in the class to present this is because there's maybe 30 students or something in the class. In other words, there's just not enough time in the day for every student to sit there and just spend hours elaborating on their great idea. And the reason there's 30 kids in a class, on average, more or less, is because it's a monetary thing. It's a matter of efficiency. If you only have one kid in the class, that's one kid paying a certain amount of money to the professor for the semester. He's not going to be making enough money to eat. But if you can cram 30 kids into a classroom, those are a lot more kids paying for that semester's worth of a professor's work. And then that extrapolates outward to the fact that the entire college system is a business. This is not an inherently bad thing. I mean, if you're a business, you have to be above the profit margin. You can't, go into debt. You have to make a certain amount of money. But the problem is, as your story, your personal anecdote articulates, sometimes I believe that these colleges, these school systems, they become more about administrators and professors just wanting a paycheck at the end of the fucking month than they actually care about really pioneering intellectualism, really innovating, really pushing the fucking paradigm. And what happens is that there isn't enough time for somebody like you to propose a disruptive new idea. You're some guy who comes in there and says, hey, maybe there's a better way to have architecture, to do architecture. There's not enough time in the day to consider that. And even worse for them, let me finish the last point because this is crucial. Even worse for them is, what if you propose an idea that makes everything they teach wrong? Everything that's in their textbooks wrong. Everything that's on the exams wrong. Everything that students for years and years and years now have studied hard to get right on an exam, but now everything they learned is wrong or outdated or irrelevant. If that's true, I mean, this is the case with, this is the case with science as well. Every new intellectual paradigm in science is initially met with resistance. Let's see. What's a good example? I mean, you can talk about, let's say, quantum physics. The quantum physics experiments, the quantum physics paradigm was initially met with a lot of resistance because a lot of what quantum physics suggested was counterintuitive to the Newtonian model of physics from the 16th century, I believe, when Newton was around. So the point is that sometimes money gets wrapped up into these educational systems we call college or universities. And the people who run these colleges, the administrators and professors, they care more about making sure that nobody rocks the boat too much. There's this term, it's called disruptive innovation. This is like Uber. There's a company called Uber. They are like a taxi service. Here in America, I don't know about in Australia, but here in America, Uber was a form of disruptive innovation. It destroyed the taxi industry. Originally, we had the taxi industry where if you wanted to operate a taxi, you had to get a bunch of licenses and permits from the government. All these regulatory things that they claim was because they wanted to, keep things safe and regulated. But what ended up happening was it was so hard to start a taxi company that there was no more competition. And when there was no more competition, the taxi company became complacent. They just allowed, they became inefficient. The people always complained that the taxi cabs were filthy and dirty. Just all these complaints because the taxi company didn't have a competitor to force them to do their job better. Uber, this company Uber, they said, fuck you government regulations, fuck you permits, fuck you licenses. We're going to operate our company, which is basically a taxi service, as an alternative to the mainstream taxi cab companies. We're going to offer this service, even though it's illegal in most states, but we're going to offer it. So they offered the service, but they were so innovative. They allowed you to use your smartphone, the integrated smartphone technology. You download the Uber app, you press a button, the ride shows up, you pay via fucking your credit card information already on your card. You can add a tip at the end. The thing uses a GPS on your phone, so you can see when the how far away the thing is. And then of course Uber, the cars tend to be cleaner than the taxi cabs. In other words, Uber was a form of disruptive innovation that pissed off the taxi monopoly. And the taxi monopoly went fucking crazy. They were protesting Uber, saying that they're evil, that they're too competitive, all this bullshit. And Uber was a form of disruptive innovation that shattered the economic paradigm and actually improved things. It actually improved the taxi industry because now you can get a fast, clean, much more well-mannered driver to show up, and it's just a better industry as a whole. People are flocking to Uber. So just as in the case of Uber, it was a form of disruptive innovation that the established taxi monopoly didn't like it, in the case of the schools, in the case of the universities, if somebody comes on, along with a new idea that proves all the previous generations were wrong, whether it's in physics or science or architecture or whatever the fuck it is, if they're wrong, then that disrupts the entire industry. Like I said a moment ago, the exams are wrong. All the degrees you gave out to students, all those degrees, they might be somewhat meaningless if what they got a degree in turned out to be wrong. There is a natural resistance to new ideas that push the paradigm shift forward. This is true in colleges and universities, and that's why I believe they shunned you. That's why I got a D on my short story, because I didn't follow orders. It's more about authoritarian control and maintaining the status quo than it really is about fostering a true, a progressive intellectual environment that just stimulates ideas and progress.
Absolutely. It was one of the most infuriating things that I've ever been through, and for some reason I was just mentally prepared to take it. Like I didn't really I don't even remember having an enraged fit or anything. Like I thought I would have exploded, but I was just like, well, looks like I'm gonna go back next year. That's all I thought. I was just like, well,
Yeah.
whatever. I just gotta suck this up and keep moving forward because we've come this far. There's no point in really backpedaling now. But it's interesting how can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, my microphone sounds a bit funny, but it's interesting how it's this institution that's just based upon the idea, the false idea that it's really there to teach people how to think, how to learn, and really all it is doing, like you point out, and I'll just try and summarize it in a sentence, is it tries to prevent disruptive behavior. So it tries to calm people with so-called ADHD who might be disrupting the class, tries to stifle innovative ideas
So
that
true.
might disrupt the establishment. It tries to stop disruption. It tries to stop evolution in one sense. It
Yep.
just tries to keep plowing forward with the same monotonous ideas, so that the illusion of permanence can be sustained. It's very much just space, and I think it's deeper than it just being a business. It's also if you go through this system for decades and you believe in it and then you preach it as a teacher, it becomes a part of your identity. Like it is beyond just a way
Yep.
for you to make a paycheck. And even with it might start off that way, especially with school teachers, primary school teachers. I thought of how most primary school teachers are women, right? And why I think that is because what a lot of women look for in jobs is something that they can have a lot of holidays, a lot of time off. And if you're leaving work at 3:30 every day, or before 5 to get home a bit earlier, so you can have more spare time with kids, etc. And then you're spending time around kids all day. So I think it's an industry that appeals very much to women for these reasons, who might not really be entering the field in order to teach the next generation to the best of their ability, but they might be more
They're
self-interested.
glorified babysitters.
Yeah, exactly. They are
That's all they are.
glorified babysitters, and they're there to just uphold things as they are. So I've written around a few different ideas that I thought of while listening to your book. One that I think you may have touched upon, but I'd like to talk about it a bit more here, is the idea of forced socializing. Now, when I was first like introduced to school, I remember feeling really strange. Like I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then I had this feeling again when I was suddenly no longer at primary school where I was for 8 years of my life, then just in a new school when I went to high school. I felt different. I felt like I was no longer the person that I was the year before. Like all of a sudden, I no longer have this identity, like who I am in comparison to my peers. Um, and what was feeling essentially was just a massive sense of social anxiety. So it was just like this feeling where I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to really associate with most of the people. Not necessarily because they're like bad people or anything, but it's just the idea of being grouped in with a whole lot of other people with for no other reason based on you live in the same area and you are the same approximate age. Like that's really absurd and you don't really get that. It's not really a natural way to socialize with other people. Like you and me, we live on the other side of the planet and we're voluntarily talking to each other, so there's no real social anxiety here because there's a reason, a common interest outside our geographic location and our age. I'm assuming you're a few years older than me. So, kinds of connections that are formed in a school-based system are really just kind of imposed and kind of, I guess they really aren't really beneficial. There's like not really much mutual benefit going on with the way the way students are forced to socialize. And then I started listening to one of your podcasts on unschooling, and it was about a mother of three children, and she talks about how she originally started putting one of the females into school, and then she said that her daughter, quote, became anxious. And that kind of solidified this idea, which I had before I even saw that, which is that this kind of forced socializing with people who don't necessarily have in common may be a cause of a lot of so-called mental disorders that really just like the only solution that we try to find for them is through drugs or counseling instead of just looking at the artificial environments that we're creating.
Well, that's certainly true with the whole ADHD epidemic. I mean, that's a so-called mental condition or mental disorder, which, according to one book, which I believe is called The ADHD Explosion, the authors looked at it and they concluded that there's almost 100% certainty that the vast majority of ADHD diagnoses come from the school system. So it comes because, there's one kid in class who can't sit still, shut up, and pay attention. So the teacher's like, okay, we got to have a parent-teacher conference. And the teacher tells the parents, your kid has trouble paying attention. He's not going to pass the class. Oh my God, his life is going to be over. But here, go see the psychiatrist. He may have ADHD. Put him on drugs. So yeah, I mean, if you're talking about ADHD, then yeah, that's definitely a mental condition that is primarily created by the school system. And people have trouble believing, like, when I posit the idea that ADHD might literally just be boredom, straight up everyday normal boredom, people have trouble believing that. They're like, oh, that might be true sometimes, but I do think ADHD is a real thing. Yeah, it might be. There might be cases where you legitimately can't pay attention. But the real question is that a bad thing? A lot of time we assume that because you can't pay attention to things, because maybe you like to daydream all day, that must mean that it's a bad thing. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that you should try to change. Sometimes some of the greatest intellectual discoveries happen when people are fucking daydreaming. This was the case with Albert Einstein. This was technically the case with Isaac Newton. Sometimes this was definitely the case with Jacob Barnett. Sometimes you're just sitting around and you're just fucking, your mind is just fucking wandering places, and something happens. You become receptive to a new way of thinking, and then suddenly, bam, you just have a fucking epiphany. And the school system in a way is the exact opposite of that. Whereas on one level you have the Albert Einsteins and the Jacob Barnetts who don't really try to come up with new intellectual paradigms. They just kind of happen. They just kind of occur on a whim sometimes. On the other side, you have people who are in the school system, and the school system is all about ensuring that you are smart. It's a system where it puts all this momentum to make sure these kids come out smart. Just an iron fist smashing them into conformity. Take the test, cram the information down your throat, study hard for the test. These kids gotta be, your fucking average kid in college is, downing fucking shots of coffee and espresso because they need the energy to focus, because without it they can't. But that's the thing, that's the subjectivity of it. And this is the analogy that I make. If you're watching a movie that is boring, you do not come to the conclusion that, oh, the reason I can't pay attention to this boring movie is because there's something wrong with me. I might have ADHD. Let me go take ADHD medication, some Ritalin, so that I can focus on the movie. That's boring. No, you just say, this movie's not for me, this movie sucks, and you leave the fucking theater. With ADHD, and the average kid in a classroom, what people are saying is, the classroom can't possibly be boring. The problem can't possibly be the irrelevant bullshit you're teaching these kids. The problem can't possibly be a teacher who's only there for a paycheck. No, the problem must be the innocent, helpless little kid who has no clue why he's there or what's happening, put in there forcefully every fucking day by his parents. He must have a problem. He must have a mental deficiency called ADHD, and now we're going to give him drugs, Ritalin, which is a stimulant chemically related to cocaine, literally, in the stimulant category. In other words, what we're telling kids is that the only way you can be good in school is if you're a fucking crackhead. You have to be a crackhead to pay attention in your classrooms. So, because that's basically what you're doing. You're drugging your kids up with Ritalin, a stimulant, because the classroom environment isn't stimulating enough as it is. So you have to give them stimulants. So
have you ever,
yeah.
I was wondering, because you have a lot of interest in the idea of ADHD. I was wondering if you've ever actually gone to a professional to see whether or not you would have been, if you have it yourself.
No, I never have.
Neither have I. And I think one of the reasons that I don't have ADHD is purely because I've never actually gone to see whether or not I have it. Because for all I know, I've got it. I just don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's so subjective. It's you could explain, oh, I have difficulty concentrating in class. I want to run around. Oh, you've got ADHD. Oh, it can't just be, that you're a teenager going through hormone changes. It can't just be because you're bored in class.
Yeah.
It must be this, because then we can sell you this product. But, ADHD, I think, is not just about being bored. Think about the lack of physical activity in general caused by the school system.
Yep.
Think about how you're just forced to sit down all day.
Madness.
That's really unnatural. And I know you brought up the idea of physical intelligence. You were talking about Shaquille O'Neal, how he's pursued a career in athletics, career in basketball, and that requires muscle memory, visualization, coordination, execution, all these things that are just physical manifestations of intelligence to do with movement that humans are just generally deprived of because they're forced to sit still all day. When you're developing your body, when you're growing, that's when you should be testing your strength, speed, stamina, balance, as much as your body allows you to do. You have all this energy when you're growing up, when you're a kid, and you are supposed to be using it to run around, to use your body, to strengthen your body so that when you're an adult, you actually have, met your potential physically instead of, your only option being, well, I may as well go to the gym and lift heavy objects because I really can't, you know, put my, physical abilities towards anything else. I may as well just uh, do this and get it over and done with instead of um, having a sport that you love. And don't get me wrong, I go to the gym a lot. I was last year, especially, and I've been quite a few times this year. But now I've started skateboarding again, which I haven't done in 5 years. And like, um, people will likely think, you're too old to do that. You're like 26 years old. You can't start skateboarding again. But just riding around on a skateboard and you're just using all these weird muscles and weird patterns that you haven't used for like 5 years. It feels really awkward. Um, and it gives you a reason to move instead of just doing it as something you have to do because you're forced to sit down all day and you don't want to become unfit. Like the idea that, you have to sit down all day for, 6 hours from when you're like 5 years old to when you're 18 years old and you have no say in it. That's ridiculously retarded. And then you have PE, the only time you get to run around really, and you're forced to do whatever the teacher tells you yet again. You're forced to play basketball, you're forced to play baseball, whatever the teacher sets. You can't go and use your body how you want to use it. And even in primary school, one of the things I wanted to learn was karate, but well, that's just because I didn't know any other forms of martial arts. But I still wasn't allowed to do that because it was seen as dangerous. But I think one of the most dangerous activity a person can do is to sit still because that's guaranteed to give you all these different health problems.
Yeah, you know, the rigidity of the school system in terms of how you have to sit still all day is sort of a reflection of how the system treats children as a whole. The fact that you have to sit still all day it's symptomatic of the way that the school system um, uh, thinks of children and thinks of how they have to control kids. You know, they don't make kids sit still necessarily because there's a good reason for it. Having them sit still is a matter of control. I mean, if that's part of the reasons assigned seats exist. I mean, when I was in high school, almost every class had assigned seats. This was one seat that you were assigned to, and you had to sit there the entire year. That was your seat. And, you know, it's pretty obvious the only rationalization for that. It's to make classroom management easier for the teacher. This is not about, oh, you should sit here because you're closer to me and then you can hear me better and learn more. Yeah, we're going to learn things. No, the reason you're there in that assigned seat is because it just makes it easier and more efficient for the teacher to process the fucking kids that come in and out of the class in like fucking batches. So, it really tells you something. It really tells you something about the school system. It really tells you something about how it operates, where it's coming from, and its intentions. It kind of just goes back to what I was saying near the beginning, that it's a monetary thing. People's paychecks are on the line, and the last thing these people want is something that's going to rock the boat. So things need to be rigid. Things need to be automated. Things need to be systematic. This is, of course, as well why there's the school uniforms. School uniforms exist for the same damn purpose, to process children easier. You cannot have diversity. Diversity is uncontrollable. Diversity is unpredictable. Diversity is spontaneous. If you give each individual student in a school the freedom to wear whatever the fuck they want, it's too much. It's too hectic. You're going to have one kid with this shirt and one kid might come in with a shirt that says something on the front of the shirt that might offend somebody. There's no room for variety in a system that has to be as efficient as possible. And this is why the school system in many ways kind of does resemble a factory. It kind of does resemble a motherfucking factory. Um, and one thing I wanted to mention earlier was there's another mental condition diagnosis called ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. Oppositional defiant disorder is basically a kid who's rebellious, and it's like it's a little disconcerting. It's a little unsettling when you kind of think for yourself for a moment that maybe the kids who are diagnosed the most in school, maybe the kids who misbehave the most are actually the better people. Um, what I mean by that is if the entire school system is trying to control you, if the entire school system is trying to stifle your potential as a free, unique individual who wants to express himself and do what makes him happy, and the school system is telling a kid, hey, the reason you can't sit still, the reason that you keep, standing up and questioning the teacher, it's because you have ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. What they're really saying is that the kids who are most rebellious, the kids who want to stand up, stand out, and do their thing, that they're the problem. You're basically telling people who are too good for the system that they're the problem. And in many ways, yes, I would say that the kid who can't sit still and shut up and do what he's told, I admire that. I respect that. Because you know what? If anything, those are some of the essential qualities of a genius. This is one of the things that I mentioned in my book, is that some of the essential qualities of a genius have to do with rebellious. Yeah.
Something here that I just kind of like put together. Then it's something I've thought about a little bit. But basically, what I thought of, right, is both me and you, we make quite a lot of videos about men and women. You kind of go more the anti-feminist route, a bit so more than me. Where I'm more like anti-traditionalism and anti-feminism. It's a bit more, just like a different way of looking at it. But with ADHD or ADD, there's 3 points here. Okay, first of all, more males are diagnosed with ADHD than females. More males have high IQs than females. Like on average, men have higher IQs, and there's far more geniuses that are male than female. And 2 more points is that men make up 95% of the innovation, but women, females in general, get better grades at school. So what does that say about, the education system as a whole?
Wow, that's a huge point. Let me process that for a moment.
I just really put it together then. Like, I've thought of these things separately, but I haven't really put that.
Yeah, no, that's important. Let me process that for a moment. That's a damn good point. Yeah, that kind of makes it seem like, that kind of just further solidifies the idea that school isn't necessarily about cultivating the highest potential of genius. Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that. I will definitely add something onto that, but I don't know if you wanted to add something else to that. That was powerful.
Well, if you've got something to add to it now, go for it.
And I guess that's why the thought suddenly came to you, because I was talking about oppositional defiant disorder, and I guess the point that I was trying to make is that, it seems in a way that the school system, and I do mention this in the book, it doesn't want you to be as good as possible. The school system doesn't want you to be as good as you can be. It only wants you to be as good as your corporate overlords want you to be. So, there's a author, her name is Charlotte Iserbyt, and she wrote a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. I never read the whole thing because it's super in depth.
It's a long book.
Yeah, it's like super
I've read
long.
Part of it myself, and I think I listened to some extracts, like audio extracts.
She's
of it.
fascinating.
But
She's great.
Makes some good points.
Yeah, I love her work. And she calls school workforce training. That's what she calls school. She just doesn't fucking cut any corners. She just says it's workforce training. And that's sort of it proves and it solidifies this idea that school is about training you to be a good obedient worker. And if that's true, then yes. If you're a rebellious-minded person who maybe wants to start your own business, or maybe has the capacity to think outside the box, that maybe you can innovate a current industry. Maybe you could make cell phones like no one else has ever made cell phones, or revolutionize. But the problem is that people who revolutionize things, they destroy old established paradigms. And so if school is workforce training, if the purpose of school is to make sure that new generations of young kids are good, obedient workers to go work for the current corporate establishment, then it makes total sense that they would try to condemn kids who act out, who are rebellious. The kid has ADHD. The kid has oppositional defiant disorder. Because yes, you are too rebellious. You might destroy the current corporate monetary establishment. So you need to sit still. You need to shut the fuck up. You need to do what you're told and learn obedience, little boy. Because if you rock the boat too much, our whole economic paradigm might come crashing down. So this point you just made about how boys are diagnosed with ADHD more than women, more than girls, and that girls perform better in school, kind of tells you through statistics that the system isn't, and of course the additional fact that you said that men tend to have the highest IQs, 95% of all innovations created by men. It tells you that that school system where women perform better than men and men are diagnosed with ADHD more than women, it tells you that that's a system that isn't interested in cultivating and fostering the absolute peak potential of human intelligence and genius.
Yes, yes, spot on. And I would also add that I think men or boys in general get punished a lot more at school as well. So there's also that factor. It's not just the diagnosis of ADHD. They're also, given detentions a lot more, uh, and so on. So it's coming at it from both ends. Boys are punished more, and girls are rewarded more through this system that's not really designed to foster masculine traits that allow humans to evolve and progress as a civilization. It's aimed to get, to create the illusion, because you know how it's just so politically correct to have women outperforming men or girls outperforming boys in all areas, and
The new
just a lot of
Ghostbusters.
people just, yeah, yeah, it's fucking music to a lot of people's ears to hear that finally women aren't oppressed like they have always been. Finally, there's more women in this field than men are in this field, and it was traditionally done by men. But there's universities. There's a university called Delft University. I think it's in Amsterdam, I'm not too sure. But they essentially wanted to hire a professor in a given field. But they wanted a female professor because they were concerned that there's a lack of females in that field. So what they ended up doing was encouraging the people to hire females, but all of the female applicants weren't as qualified as the male applicants. So they ended up just saying, all right, you have to hire a female for this role, overlook the men. And they ended up following through hiring a female professor. And then there's also other fields of study in university where they have female quotas where they have to really accept less qualified female applicants over more qualified male applicants just to fulfill female quotas in certain areas, which is, absolutely insane. I don't think they have that in Australia, I'm not too sure, but they definitely have it in the UK, based on this video I saw by a YouTuber who used to go by the name of Man Woman Myth, who explains how feminists pursue equality of outcome in the education system instead of equality of opportunity. And the idea of equality is kind of weird when you think about it. I mean, like it's kind of based around uniformity, like scholars as well. If you did like, it's definitely something that's promoted by the school system a lot is the idea of equality. Just because like people aren't equal doesn't mean that they can't have mutually beneficial relationships. There seems to be this idea that if you have one group of people drastically outperforming another group, then it's somehow somebody's responsibility to make sure that group is brought down to the other level, regardless of the measures imposed to create that in the first place. But yeah, it's absurd.
Indeed. Um, yeah, man, that was a pretty powerful thing that we just kind of went over there. The whole women ADHD and the IQ, and yeah, that was fucking incredible, man. I know there's a lot of other things I want to talk about, but I think we just hit like a little dull point in our conversation because I didn't really have anything else to say. I don't know if there's something else you wanted to throw in. I'm sure an idea will come to me in a moment, but yeah.
Well, I was just looking through my notes then because we just kind of came to a natural stop of the conversation. But I
Yes.
was thinking about um like personally what I found most beneficial to learning growing up was definitely not school. It was playing with Lego, playing with video games, and drawing, all of which I did in my spare time, and all of which are extremely applicable to my profession now, which is architecture, where you build,
Mm.
aka use Lego, think of concept designs. You're in a visual,
Yep.
a digital simulation of
Yep.
reality, which is very much like a video game. You're having to use a controller to navigate in this space.
And you weren't allowed to
And
do that at
drawing,
school. You weren't allowed to do that
all
at
of
school.
those all of those things were ruled out and fucking frowned upon, man. They were just like the devil.
You know,
You draw
sometimes I
science
think,
class.
because I mean, look at it. I mean, if you had been allowed to pursue your desire to build things, and you had been allowed to do that every fucking day of your life, instead of spending hours in school learning shit you had no interest in and would probably never use, but instead could focus on your passion, maybe 18 years later when you grow up, you've immersed yourself so much in this that you are just a passionate expert in it who maybe has innovative new ways of thinking, right? So that's powerful. But, for some fucking reason, I lost my goddamn train of thought.
Well,
But you go ahead.
I was thinking like if you're just allowed to get into this
Mm,
this flow state
mm.
where you're just flowing through life, like flowing through a process, where instead now because I've gone through this regimented system, I wake up and I have to like really struggle within. Like I
Yep.
have to get that what's his name? That Ali Belukua, that guy's just like, just do it!
Yeah.
I have to say that to myself every
You
morning.
do.
I have to have like a double shot of espresso to
Oh,
get me
yeah.
awake. I have to just get like completely,
Yeah.
like really force myself to engage with, learning, which I have learned to associate with a form of coercion. And
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like the school and education system promotes a captor, like hostage relationship, really,
Oh, yeah.
where there's. Have you ever like you've heard of Stockholm syndrome
Oh, yeah.
before? It's almost like that, and the students are just like, they're taught to just follow the orders. They're taught to just look up to the authority and just like grow accustomed to their enslavement. And I hate to say it, but I think I have a little bit as well. Like now I've finished uni, I'm like, what the fuck do I do with my time now? I just don't even know.
It's
But the
powerful.
other,
It's powerful
the
what you
other,
said about flow states because that's what I want to cultivate in my life. I want to get to a point where everything I do is flow state, where I never have to force myself to do shit that I don't enjoy doing. Okay, maybe paying taxes once a year. That'll be the one thing I fucking hate doing that I have to do. But that's what I've been working on in the past few years. I want to only focus on doing things that I enjoy doing. And I think that's even more possible than ever, given the way the economy has changed, especially with the internet age that we live in. There's so much fluidity between interactions nowadays, due largely in part to, I think, technology and the internet and connecting people in small, subtle ways. It's created more pathways for people to flow and connect in the economy, that I think really allows people to do what they love like they've never done before. But the point that I was going to make earlier that I'd forgotten was that, yes, so you had a passion for playing with Legos. You had a passion for building things when you were young. And look at you now. You like architecture. That's something that you've been studying. That's something that you might want to pursue realistically at some point in the future. And what would have happened if, instead of spending all that time in class learning all the bullshit you didn't like, if you'd actually just been allowed to do what you love? And the thing is that I think a big part of the reason parents put their kids in school, because as much as the school system is evil, if parents didn't put their kids in school, this problem wouldn't exist in the first place. So yeah, it actually goes to parents. And why are parents putting their kids in school? I think a lot of the reasons why parents put their kids in school is because they're afraid that the child might grow up and not have any skills to survive in the modern economy. And so there's two ways to look at it. On one level, there's your personal anecdote, and there's a million of them, where you had a natural curiosity and passion for building things, and which eventually turned into an interest in architecture. And on the other side, you have the student who's forced to go through school and distract himself from what he naturally enjoys, all in the hopes that when he grows up, he'll have a certain number of skills required so that he can get a job doing something. Even though, ironically, when you go through school, you're not even specializing in anything. You're just getting a watered down, diluted sampling of 6 or 7 different subjects. You're not becoming an expert in math. You're not becoming an expert in English. You're not becoming an expert in science or history. You're just becoming mediocre in everything. And at best, what kind of job are you going to be able to get when you grow up and you enter the economy? The economy is all about specialization. For the most part, it's specialization. You need the welder who knows how to fucking weld. You need the architect who knows how to design buildings. You need the fucking NASA astronaut guy who dedicates himself so much to that industry, that field, that he can go up into fucking space and not fucking die while he's up there. So the school system teaches a watered down. It's almost like the reason they teach you a little bit of everything is because, maybe the parents who put the kids in school are afraid, well, if he only follows his passion of being an architect, what if that job doesn't exist when he grows up 18 years from now? So let's give him a little bit of everything so he's prepared, so he can get whatever job. It's almost like it's economic uncertainty that drives parents to put their kids in these school systems. And it's a goddamn shame that fear is a driving factor for this. And it really is, in a way, I can't blame parents. I don't blame them for being afraid. I mean, who knows what the economy is going to look like in 18 years? But that's actually kind of the point. You have this debt crisis right now that's crippling kids who spent their whole life in the school system, then went to college, thousands and thousands of dollars into debt, 4 years in college. And when they get out, a lot of them don't have a job. Or a lot of them don't even have that many skills to get a job.
Case in point.
Case in point. So the point is that, this idea that we can prepare and predict the future, or, if you just put them in school now, they'll be ready. You don't know what's going to happen 18 years from now. Especially the way technology in the world is changing so fucking rapidly. You can't predict the future. So I think the better way to go about it, this is my last sentence, the better way to go about it is that flow state you mentioned a moment ago. The flow state of allowing your child to pursue and follow his curiosities and his passions at will. You liked Legos. Look what happened. You ended up pursuing a career or a field of study that was relevant to passions you had your entire life. Maybe if your parents had a little bit more faith, I'm not trying to knock them, I'm just saying, and a little bit more faith in the process. And that's what I think this comes down to when it comes to the parents and the decision to put their kids in school. Most parents put their kids in school. It's a decision based on fear. And fear is not a good place for your intentions to stem from. You need to have a little bit of faith. You need to have a little trust in the process. Give your child the time, the space, and the freedom to pursue what they like, and trust that in the pursuit of one's passions and what person loves, they are going to cultivate the necessary passion for life that's going to make them relevant in the marketplace when they grow up.
And I was gonna add, on that is you're still coming at it from the assumption, right? Which school definitely does, to a degree, is that the idea of education is for you to have a job, whereas what excites me about learning and like the potentials of what I see occurring in the future is how about people work to completely reduce the amount of employment opportunities that exist. It's already happening. How about like, there's a lot of money in destroying industries. Like you point out, like people don't want disruption. People don't want disruptive ideas. If you put, hundreds or thousands or millions of people out of work, you're likely going to be saving some corporation or some business entity a lot of money. You're likely going to be able to make a lot of profit off of that yourself. So I think like something that is very worthwhile is the concept of speeding up the process of unemployment instead of, putting people through school in based on the assumption that there'll always be jobs around. How about get rid of and make as many jobs obsolete as possible and just see what happens? I mean, people be like, "Oh, what do people do without jobs? Where's the financial security? What's the purpose of doing anything productive without having it, forced upon you through work or through grades?" But the idea of, creating systems that put people out of work, it's really exciting. Like think about all the technology we have now, how many jobs it's cost. Sure, it opens up some new jobs as well, but I think the potential for it to replace and make jobs obsolete is much greater than the potential it has to create new lines of work, particularly considering that, if you want people to be able to create new lines of work, create new fields of study that don't really fall into the categories that we have now, then school isn't going to really provide that. It's not going to facilitate that.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that it's like I said a moment ago. This whole giving students 7 subjects to learn from. Yeah, I think it's all about giving them a water. I mean, the term that they use, I don't know what they use in Australia, but the term here is well-rounded. I mean, I remember I had an ex-girlfriend that I met her in high school, and I was always a shitty student. She was always an exceptional student. And I remember even back then, sometimes I would be like, "Oh, this schoolwork is pointless, fucking stupid." And she's like, "Oh, the point of school is to make you well-rounded." That's the term, well-rounded, right? So, it's supposed to make you well-rounded, and that's essentially what the whole 7 subjects is. Go ahead. What you got something to say?
Yeah, I realize what the term well-rounded means, right? Because there's another concept I thought of while I was listening to your book. Is that what does it mean to be an adult? And you described how you were feeling at school in one of your sentences as miserably bored. And this is what it means to be an adult for most people, is to be
Oh
miserably
yeah.
fucking bored. To be well-rounded, as people would like to say it to make an excuse. And then there's people that will say, well, you might not like the work, but you've got to do it just to get good grades. It will pay off in the end. But to me, this is essentially saying, you know, destroy your soul, destroy your inner child, destroy the part of you that makes you unique so that you can be molded into somebody else's ideal, somebody else's idea of a utility, so someone else can take advantage of you, so you can live up to someone else's idea of success. Do what everyone else is doing. We want you down on our level. Be well-rounded. It just essentially means destroy your fucking soul
Be
so I don't feel
average.
bad about myself.
Be
And that's,
average.
yeah.
Be average, yeah. And that's the thing. It's like I've seen in my personal experience in my own life, and I also see it in other people who are just happy and living a life that they love. People who tend to be happiest and the most self-actualized, they tend to be people who are just 100% radically dedicated and accepting of their own unique quirks, their own unique interests, and the things that make them unique. And I found that the people who are least happy tend to be the people who are watered down in a sense. The people who aren't, they've become like this corporate blob, this thing that is afraid to really love any particular passionate thing. It's like, oh man, there's a little example on the edge of my mind that I'm trying to think of right now. But it's just, you know, it's kind of like, I guess imagine if you were like at a social gathering and, you know, you are just, yeah, this is a good example. You're just fucking obsessed with, I don't know, fucking, I don't know, UFC. Say you're passionate as fuck about the UFC. But you go to like a party or like a social gathering, and if you're really obsessed with one little specific fucking subject, it's going to be hard to carry a conversation with the 90 strangers around you at this social gathering. And if you ever have heard of the concept of like small talk, um, small talk is always the most irrelevant, ambiguous, vague shit, like talking about the weather. We're talking about, like you and me right now, we're having a very niche conversation. We're talking about some niche shit that although most people probably agree school was a piece of shit, they probably wouldn't be able to carry this conversation the way you and I are. So, I think when you talk about the mainstream of society, the diluted mainstream, where people aren't interested in anything specific, they don't have one thing that electrifies their soul. They just have kind of like a generalized apathy, a kind of a generalized where they don't get into anything specific. And I'm not saying that you have to be into anything specific, but I found that sometimes when you're really obsessed with an idea or a topic or a subject, that's what like electrifies you with excitement. It electrifies you with like life and passion. So yeah, what you were saying a moment ago, that definitely rings true.
Well, yeah, I've been told my whole life that I become obsessed with things. And I guess that's true according to most people's definition of obsessed. Like, I used to become obsessed with video games, like obsessed with skateboarding, um, and more recently obsessed with like, um, zeitgeist, anti-feminism stuff. I become really focused and interested in specific things, but I move on and I'm in a flow state for like a lot of the time.
Mm.
I don't really like I'm not going to be here like 10 years from now talking about gender related things most likely. I'm probably going to have different field of interest, but I'll have that knowledge and I'll still probably have that information is like, part of my identity, part of like what I am interested in on a smaller level. But people seem to investigate a certain topic and then stop once they reach a certain comfort zone. For instance, like when people around you start saying, "Hey man, maybe you should just like stop talking about this shit for a while because it's kind of weird. It's kind of making me uncomfortable. Maybe think about something else. And then they'll go to the next level. They're like, you must have no life if you just think about this all the time. What's wrong with you? Why do you do this? Then they'll go to the next level, start calling you names. You're a fucking misogynist, you're a communist, you're an idiot, you're this, you're that. Attack, attack, attack. Because you're not living up to their standards of how they perceive you. You're disturbing the icon of you that they have formed in their head. You're no longer the you that they thought you were, and it's confusing. It's
Yes.
uncomfortable. And most people start to stop when they start to disrupt their social connections, and where fields of interest will affect their relationships. And that's what I think, like, what differentiates, like, people like me is like, I don't care. Like, I don't consider, like, friendships and relationships these things that I have to, like, hold on to for dear life. I consider them kind of like, auxiliary. They're there, and you deal with people on a per case level, on an organic level. I don't really see, like, I think we live in a culture where people are extremely possessive, and there's a strong ego attachment to their social standings, where people feel as though that who they are is defined by who they hang around and by how other people see them. So that when they can really just when you just start getting involved in a subject, people will back off because they're putting too much at risk. They're putting too much. They're exposing too much about themselves that they don't want other people to know,
Mm.
which will make them vulnerable to be attacked, to be judged, to be outcast or whatever by other people.
I think that's why that stereotype exists that you know, I've heard this a million times like if you go to a party, never bring up politics or religion
Or money.
or money. And
Never tell other people how much you earn or who you vote for.
exactly,
I tell
exactly.
everyone who I vote for. I take a photo of me drawing a dick on the ballot paper. That's who I vote for.
So yeah, you know, there's a lot of people. I would call them the mainstream masses who are offended by specialized um, topics that are polarizing. They don't like polarizing topics, and you know, I'm not going to try to figure out the psychology of why they're so avoidant to these conversations. But you know, I think it's arguable that it's kind of a form of intellectual weakness or intellectual cowardice to be so afraid of polarizing ideas. Though at the same time, I would agree that sometimes, you know, if you ever get into an argument about politics, it doesn't go anywhere half the time. It's just like this mental masturbation argument that doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. Exactly.
So
Like, could you imagine, like, I was just thinking then, like, if me or you on our channels, I'm not really, like, promoting this as an idea or anything, but just as a thought experiment, is like, what if you interviewed some hardcore feminist on your channel? Would there even be a feminist that's down to do that? I don't know. Because, like, the thing is like, feminists seem to be really averse to this kind of, like,
hmm
specialized thinking that doesn't conform to their ideals. Where, like,
yeah.
our idea of specialized thinking is, you know, like the red pill, the shattering of your own preconceived ideas. That's like the basis of, like, what I think me and you um are all about with our YouTube channels, where, like, feminist is purely ideological driven. It's already got an established framework, and anything that doesn't fit into that framework, it rejects. So, like, most feminists would just completely reject the 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 idea of even having a conversation with you or me about their beliefs and facts that may challenge
Yeah,
them.
they create echo chambers where, they don't have to hear any alternative points of view. Every time that I've been asked to debate, I'll debate. I mean, I debated a quote unquote black supremacist like 3 weeks ago.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, which was funny. It was definitely funny. Uh, and so yeah, feminists are known for being averse to debating because I would argue that most feminist ideas are based on assumptions or they're based on just talking points with no backing. Oh yeah, it's the patriarchy, but there's really no evidence that there's a patriarchy. Or if there is a patriarchy, it doesn't necessarily mean that it negatively affects women. Like chivalry was all about pampering women with fucking care. Like so, yeah, I think that
I thought of a good riddle, right? Here's a little riddle. What came first, the feminists or the air-conditioned office? You just don't know. It's like the chicken and the egg.
that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think the answer is pretty obvious. Well, is it? I don't know. Is there an answer to that? Do you know the answer to that riddle?
Well, I think, like there was 100 air conditioners installed, and maybe one or two feminists popped up in that city. And the same thing repeated again and again. More air conditioners there are in offices, the more feminists there seems to be.
Well,
The more, the
well,
more
air
technology,
conditioning.
the more technology we get, the better women are treated, the more feminist there seems to be. It's insane.
Well, air conditioning is sexist, according to one feminist. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's
I
true.
don't know if you heard about that,
Yeah,
but
they fall,
yeah,
don't they?
yeah, man. And then it's crazy. You talk about like the feminization of schools. Yeah, schools are definitely very feminine oriented, just by the mere fact that teachers are mostly female, of course. Yeah, I remember. I don't think I ever had. I had maybe. I don't know. I would say maybe 10% of all my teachers were male, and oh man, yeah. I have another. I have another. Well, yeah. I'll say this story. I have another horror story from school. This was when I was in college, like back in 2009. I was in English 2. It's another English class. I don't think this is a coincidence. I was in my English 2 class, college now. And this teacher was actually a straight on fucking feminist. She was a literal feminist witch. She was old. She was an old hag. She was like skinny. She had like these tobacco tarred teeth. She smoked like a fucking chimney. She literally looked like a witch, a scrawny old witch. And every fucking story we had to read in class was a fucking feminist story. I think there was this one story. It's called like the Dollhouse or some shit like. I don't know if you've heard of it. I think the
Yeah,
Dollhouse,
yeah, Bauhaus, something.
the Playhouse, the Dollhouse, some shit like that. Every fucking story was feminist propaganda. Back then, I wasn't very conscious of the whole like feminist idea, but it was obvious that yeah, it was all feminist bull. It was like oh, female empowerment, all that bullshit. Um, well, one time I was at the front of the. I always sat at the front of the class, and while she was lecturing us about some other female literature, feminist literature story, I was sitting down at the front of the class reading a fantasy book that was literally like this thick. It was like the size of a fucking brick. This well-written fantasy novel. So while she's teaching English, I'm sitting at the front and hey, you know what? I want to read my fucking fantasy novel. So I'm sitting there reading it and she has a fucking meltdown suddenly. And she tells me close the book now. She tells me to close the book because it bothered her that while she was lecturing, I was reading. But it's funny that, when I really started to get into writing back when I was like around middle school, one of the ways that I made my writing better, my technique, this is like I self-taught myself how to be a better writer. I emulated my favorite authors. So what I would do is I would say, okay, my favorite authors, they use this technique, okay, and I would kind of emulate that, and it would expand my vocabulary. It would expand my toolbox awareness of what kind of techniques I could use. So basically, if I'm sitting in class reading a fantasy novel, she doesn't like it. Well, lady, that's how I got good and better at writing to begin with, by reading published authors who know how to write. So it's another example. that they don't give a fuck. Sometimes it's not always about learning in school. Sometimes it's about shutting the fuck up, making that teacher feel special, following orders, doing what you're told.
And you've got to admit, how many of these teachers have just like, had a bad week. Their I don't know, their husband or wife has just been like nagging them or something for days on end, and you just know they're taking it out on the kids.
Oh hell
They're
yeah.
just they're raising hell because their own life sucks. And
They they
you point
probably
that out. You get smart enough to point that out to teachers in high school. You just say, "Hey, don't take it out on me because your life sucks," and then it just escalates.
no. Then you're
Um,
fucked. You're fucked. Then you're just gonna get Fs on all your fucking
well,
assignments.
there was this teacher. This funny situation because I used to get in trouble for pretty much anything in school. Just like if a teacher felt like he or she just wanted to get me in trouble, it would happen. But this one lunchtime was like really hot. Me and my friend were like water bombing people, just filling up balloons, throwing them at people, obviously with water. And then a teacher came up to us and was like, "Yeah, you've both got to come into school on Saturday for 2 hours as punishment for a water-related incident." And I was like, "Oh, we're just throwing it at our friends. Like it was all just fun and games. We weren't like harassing anyone or causing fights." And she was like, "It doesn't matter. It's still a water-related incident." And I was like, "Well, is there? Do I get in any more trouble if I throw the rest of these?" Like, it doesn't matter what you do. Either way, you're just gonna have a Saturday school. So then me and my friend just water bombed her. We didn't get
Wow.
in any more trouble. So I was just like, well, she really didn't think that one through. Like, she didn't really have any like negative or positive reinforcement left. So I think she enjoyed it a little bit deep down. I think she wanted to get water bombed.
Yeah, man. I guess one last thing that I want to say is that, I think, and I've said this before in videos going back to, I think, as early as 2014, that I think, sometimes school may not necessarily be evil. It might just be the best that society can do. And, there's an economic reality to things. I mean, if, for example, you're Albert Einstein, your ideas about physics will make you a lifetime millionaire. I mean, I don't know how much he was worth, but the guy was set for life. Um, and if you are Steve Jobs and you innovate smartphones, you will make tons of fucking money and you'll be set for life. If you're Shaquille O'Neal and you're a fucking master in basketball, you are set for life. It seems like people who excel and do amazing things that a lot of people, it benefits a lot of people. Those people who excel are set. Economically speaking, monetarily speaking, they have nothing to worry about. But then there's everybody else. What does everybody else do? What does everybody else do to get a job? What does everybody else do to make money? Um, and I feel like sometimes life itself, life here on planet Earth, the biological reality, is sort of like a Ponzi scheme. And it seems like there's always going to be somebody at the top who makes the most money, and it's just going to slowly trickle down until there's people fucking poor and impoverished. And I wonder if school is just a byproduct of the fact that it seems not everyone can be a master at everything. Not everyone can have the fucking Nobel Prize winning idea. And if that's the case, then there's a more fundamental problem. You probably appreciate this with your whole like zeitgeist, RBE, resource-based economy stuff. But yeah, it seems like not everybody can offer that unique fucking value to the world that makes them economically set. And I feel like sometimes school is a byproduct of this economic reality. The school system exists because, oh look, Albert Einstein came along and he revolutionized this intellectual field of physics, and now everybody else is trying to be like Einstein. Now they're teaching it at the universities, and they're teaching it in the classrooms, and now everybody else wants to learn his stuff because he's at the cutting edge, and all the money and all the government support and the grants are going to Albert Einstein, so everybody wants to be like Albert Einstein, so all the students go into class to be like Albert fucking Einstein. And Yeah, I just see like there's an economic reality to this thing, and I feel like there's a deeper issue than school. And you might say, oh, the deeper issue is parents who choose to put their kids in school. But a lot, again, like we said before, a lot of times the parents are putting their kids in school because of the economic fears. What if he grows up and can't get a job? So they put their kids in school. So I do think that there's an economic problem, a monetary, just fundamental issue that's more fundamental than school.
Well, yeah, I've had this thought recently. I'm not too sure how valid it is, but I'm throwing it out there and I'm putting it. Like, I've made a short video about it and so on. One of my more recent videos mentions that a lot of the problems that we see as being racial, economic, even problems related with the education system, the idea that we all have to um, contribute economically one way or another in an increasingly automated world where there's less jobs. All these ideas, all these problems that we face seem to stem from one really like one main point, which is that what I see occurring is that there is what I perceive to be an overpopulation, but I don't want to just say that word because it's a highly loaded word. What I see is that there are too many people for the amount of jobs that are going to exist, for the amount of resources, food, energy, and water that we have available left. And it doesn't matter how much economic systems are reformed, how much education systems change. If there's people that are just reproducing at unsustainable rates that our economic systems and technology can't accommodate, then at what point do people take responsibility and say, well, I am going to have to just focus on myself and not have a family and essentially just get what I want out of life instead of, um, you know, being in a traditional relationship. This is one of the reasons why I'm really skeptical about marriage. Is I think that a lot of women are getting married and or reproducing because it benefits them financially, but then again, on the other side of the spectrum, women that are in poverty seem to reproduce at even more unsustainable rates than women who are married and taken care of. So it's kind of this double-edged sword where humans are just like caving into their instincts, and it doesn't matter how much technology we have. You can only extract so much oil from the ground, and you only have so much space on the planet. You only have so much time here, and so many people dedicate it to raising a family. When their kids will grow up to be in their 30s almost at this point, still living at home because house prices are skyrocketing after they've gone through like 2 decades of education. And this is like now.
Hmm.
Like, if people our age have kids and these systems are still in place, theoretically, you could be dead before they move out of home because there might be no jobs available. The price of houses might be so high that you literally couldn't afford a house if you worked your whole life to get
Hmm.
one. You'd have to just inherit one. And on top of that, the price of oil might become so high that you might be spending all your money simply on food. So, like, these things I see as very real possibilities is that, overpopulation just accelerates. If you look at, like, human population to oil extraction from the earth, it's pretty much just like an exact correlation. Like, oil is extracted and there's more people being born. So when oil starts to decline in productivity, either humans kill each other off through war, or they stop reproducing at unsustainable rates, or they starve to death. And it seems like we're going to be choosing starving to death or killing each other off.
Yeah, that's a pretty.
But you know,
Yeah, yeah,
just a light-hearted conversation, you
yeah.
know.
Just chilling here. Yeah, that's a pretty intense, thing. But there's a lot of doom and gloom interpretations of the future. You're definitely right. I haven't studied that stuff enough to know if it's just like climatologist people spreading fear mongering to justify their industries, or if there's legitimate. I haven't really studied it. I think sometimes there is a lot of environmental disaster exaggerations, like overpopulation. I mean, I've heard people say that we haven't even, there's so much room on the planet that we get this idea that there's like not enough space left, but there's like we barely take up a fraction of the Earth's landmass or some shit like that. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not. I'm just saying that I've heard alternatives to the very doom and gloom. Where it's overpopulation, I don't know. But if one thing is for goddamn sure is that it does seem like there's less money, there's less wealth going around nowadays, and I think this is not necessarily relevant to the podcast itself, but yeah, there's things like the whole Social Security Ponzi scheme, which I believe Social Security here in America is a Ponzi scheme. Social Security, I don't know if you know, is the program designed to take care of old people, but it's a Ponzi scheme. It always has been a Ponzi scheme from the very beginning. Social Security relies on the fact that there are more young workers today than there are old retired people, because the young workers today, they pay for the old retired people. But the problem is that there was the baby boomer generation after World War II. There was a huge influx of new kids being born, and now Social Security has become top heavy. Now there's more old people retired than there are young people working. Now I don't think it's more old people. I don't think it's literally more old people. But the point is that it's not that the proportion is different than it used to be. There's actually a lot more retired old people than before, and they are basically putting strain on the backs of young people who are literally paying into their fucking pointless retirement life, where they sit on a fucking rocking chair and drool into a television for the last 40 years of their life. I mean, I don't see the point in living. I mean, I don't know, man. I feel like, maybe I'm just saying this because I'm young and I'm nowhere near death, but I feel like once I hit 55 or 60 and I've lived my life, I feel like I might just like, take a fucking pill and end my life, man. Because I,
I was joking the other day, like if I live past 65, I'm just gonna euthanize.
yeah, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Because and maybe I'm just saying that because I'm not actually really thinking about the gravity of choosing to end
Yeah,
my own life.
it's easier to say than do,
Yeah,
you know. I
absolutely,
mean,
absolutely. But at the same time, I also think that living the last 40 years, I mean, look at an old person. You ever look at an old person? That's just, because 100, 200 years ago, the life expectancy was like, what, maybe 30, 40? I mean, 200 years ago, you lived to like 40 or something. The point is that now we live so long that old people look like walking corpses. The human body was not designed over evolution to live to 80 years old. When you live to 80 years old, your skin is drooping off your fucking skin. You look like it's not normal. So I don't know, living till 60, 70, 80, I don't know. And you know what? Why should I, an old fuck who sits down and does nothing, be a burden on young people? Because I want to sit down and drool into a television because I fear what happens after death. So I'm going to force myself to live until my heart stops at 90. I don't know. Maybe again, this is a hardcore subject, and I don't know. The reality of death is a very scary thing, I think, for most people. And if you're not really there at the precipice of death, talking about it, you'll never really know what it's actually like. So maybe I'm just talking about death like it's no big deal because I'm not actually thinking about, okay, tomorrow I made an appointment to get euthanized. Let's do it. Um, but anyways, I do think that the Social Security crisis today is part of the problem. I think
well,
that
what you're talking about there is just another element of overpopulation because I was coming at it from birth rates where you're coming at it from life expectancy is being prolonged to
Mm.
unsustainable rates as well. So it's like right now we have like a
Right,
high amount of
right.
birth rates and people living a lot longer
That's
than
true.
normal, which is why like, in the last 100 years the population's gone from like 1.52 billion to 7 billion. It's just gone through the fucking roof. But like that then like while you were talking, I was thinking like, well, what if you could like theoretically, before I'm 100 years old or whatever, just like download your consciousness into like some kind of machine or
Yeah.
something, like then where would the energy from that come from? It's just like this
Exactly.
cycle. Like we can't really have that equal society. Like we can't really have like you know people having lots of freedom and lots of resources if we continue to like have high birth rates and long life expectancy, because the more of those two things you have, the less resources, less space, less everything there really is, less freedom. People have to be controlled a lot more. Like if there's more people, like like well, I don't know if they'd actually do, but like there's that, like the more people there are, the more control there seems to be. Uh, the more military fucking what do you call them in America? Pretty much just
Military
like
industrial complex?
the militarized police
Okay,
officers, like
yeah.
the police state starts cracking down. Like, I haven't heard of you know, I think police states are a fairly new thing. I don't know, maybe it's just like they used to have fucking swords instead of guns, but I don't know. It all seems to be like fairly recent. The extent of control that is occurring,
Mm.
but at the same time, it's also like the extent of possibility for like just really um, getting outside of that control as well. It's
Best of
like, oh
times is the worst of times.
yeah,
I find that
and
to
I
be
guess
true
like
so often.
yeah, and maybe that's just like another constant duality that like always has and always will exist.
Mm.
And then you just have to really recognize like there's a few fundamental things that can tip it in one direction or the other. Like personally, obviously, I think that like overpopulation and a debt money based system are two things that really contribute to mental and social physical enslavement of people. Like if there were a lot less people, if we didn't all have to work these pointless jobs, we'd have a lot more freedom, and I think people would just generally meet their potential a lot more as well. Like we wouldn't need these education systems. And just to summarize my point on education, which I guess is like the point of this podcast, is you know at the time being, it is obviously like I think it's probably best for most people to go. I don't think people should be forced to go to it every day for 12 years or however long it is and wherever you live. But I think that like if given the choice when I was growing up, I probably would have gone, 3 or 4 days a week on average. Maybe not for the whole day every day, but I probably would have gone for the majority of it. Um, and just like instead of organizing classes based around your geographic location and your age, like why isn't school online? Why isn't there some kind of education system online where classes are taught um like in a personal setting, in a semi-personal setting, through the basis of the student's interests, through the subject, through their ability level, etc. Like one of the problems with school is that there's no competition. No one's giving school or university any competition, and there's so much potential on the internet for people to create a a competitor to that existing establishment. but it's just so hard for it to get the traction needed for it to be considered a viable alternative that it might not even ever happen. Like, well, it probably will, like, given enough time. But, like, surely there's some way to educate more people than ever before in a more efficient way than ever before, simply by using the internet and allowing students to have more freedom and autonomy with where and when and what they learn about instead of this stupid system of throwing them into a building for 6 hours a day for 1.5 decades because they live in a certain place and were born in a certain time.
I think that's probably going to happen real soon. A real revolution in education is probably about to happen. Mainly because the educational system is just imploding right now. I mean, you talk about private colleges, public or anything. The debt burden is just crippling that fucking industry. But then, yeah, then there's the question of, you know, how do you move forward? Do you innovate the system? The problem is that I think fundamentally the issue you still have is even if you find a better way to educate kids, it doesn't change the fact that most of what kids learn is fucking useless. They just never use it. They never apply it. So then you still have that as a fundamental problem. And I feel like that's a big issue is that, I've thought about before the idea of what if we just, okay, we already have a school system in most countries. You have your public school system, your grade school, kindergarten through 12th grade. How can we change this? Well, if we just shut down all the schools, you're going to have teachers everywhere out of jobs. It's going to create like an economic fucking recession or some shit. So I thought, why not just make schools voluntary? Do not force kids to go to school. Keep the schools open. We already have tax money paying for the teachers, paying for the schools, paying for all that shit. Keep funneling the money there. But instead of making schools mandatory, just allow kids to show up there voluntarily. This would be great. Because if you're a teacher, I think I mentioned this in one of the podcasts or something. If you're a teacher and the only kids who show up to class are the kids who want to be there, who want to learn math, then that means that every kid who's there is going to actually be paying attention. So you're not going to have to waste energy telling a stupid kid in the back of the class to shut up and pay attention. You're going to have fewer kids in class, meaning the education you provide can be more personal and more time can be allocated to each student as opposed to distributing it to 30 kids, half of which who aren't interested, thus ask more questions, wasting the time of the kids who do want to learn. You get rid of all that shit, at least the school environment would be a lot better. But that still doesn't address so many other fucking economic problems. But I don't want to go down that road because we've been talking for an hour and 45 minutes. I think we've talked enough for today. So we'll go ahead and conclude our stuff. I'll go first. Guys, my YouTube channel, obviously Red Pill Philosophy. Check out the links below. My new book, Success Without School, Think Outside the Classroom, is now available. If you guys want to listen to a free preview, you listen to the audiobook version, a free introduction preview, just click the link below. You get to listen to a free preview of my book. Highly recommend it. I think you guys would love it. Mason, go ahead, plug your channel, plug your stuff.
Yeah, my channel is No Holds Barred. It's basically based upon shattering your own preconceptions of reality and me trying to do that to you and me trying to do that to myself all at the same time kind of thing. It's kind of just about overcoming rules that we think exist, which I guess is what the term no holds barred means. It means to get rid of the rules, to throw them out. So yeah, there's a lot of videos about anti-feminism, anti-traditionalism, anti-marriage, anti-money. Here's one about anti-education system. And I guess like if you want to give it a positive spin, it's about pro-male, pro ideas, new ideas, essentially just about, a new paradigm of thought for myself, and me trying to spark that in other people as well. So please go check it out, and thanks for listening to this podcast.
Yeah, guys, definitely check out his channel. I do recommend it. He's done a lot of good videos about feminism, bashing the shit out of it, and they're good videos, so check them out. I think you guys will enjoy it. All right, guys.
And
yeah, go ahead.
I've read, just for people wondering if you didn't catch it at the start, I've listened to the book Success Without School. I'd also highly recommend that. It was about yeah, 4.5 hours long or something to listen through. So I was listening to that while I was skateboarding, and just a all-round great book. Gives many examples of geniuses that have lived very successful lives without the education system, and in some cases in spite of it. And I think it's very interesting the examples he gives of how these quote unquote dropouts, which the school system considered them, are now taught in schools by the schools that rejected them
Yep.
and the way they thought to begin with. So for anyone else going in through the education system, whether you're at school or uni, and you want some kind of like sympathy, some kind of like if you're on this train of thought, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, definitely highly recommend the book as well.
Good.
And
I'm
I'm just
glad.
starting the podcast now, which are also good.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad you liked it, man. I'm glad I put a lot of hard work into that. I wanted it to come out good, but
Definitely worth spending a few dollars, I mean, like, there's a lot of work that goes into making podcasts and books. So why not, like, support the content that you like?
totally. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for watching, and all the links are below. So take care, y'all. Bye bye.